Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. Tonight, I'm sharing 9 true encounters with feral people deep in the Appalachian wild stories of mimicry. Vanished trails, and footsteps that never learned to walk right. They don't live in towns. They live between the trees, older than roads, and quieter than bones. Before we begin, please consider subscribing, like the video, share it with someone who hikes too far, and tell me where you're listening from. Now hush the world, and let's begin. It was mid-October when I went into the holler, alone like a fool. My name is Rowan Ellis. I was 34 then, a freelance cartographer under contract to verify old coal maps in eastern Kentucky. The job was dull on paper, just trail routes and topographic markers. But the field work pulled me into places the GPS couldn't quite name, old roads that led nowhere, and graveled switchbacks that hadn't been touched since the 60s. This one started off Pine Jaw Ridge, just past Harlan. The locals at the diner marked it in pencil and said not to linger near the cut stone ruin. One of them slid a map across the table and said, "You'll know it when you see it." I found it just before dusk, an old stone foundation shaped like a chapel, hidden in a depression of the woods where even the birds seemed hesitant to sing. The walls were only waist high, made from stacked fieldstone, moss-bitten and dark with age. There was no roof, no steeple, no sign of a cross. But inside, 7 wooden pews had been rebuilt. They were newer, cut from raw pine, sap still bleeding at the edges. At first, I thought it was a restoration. Then I stepped closer and saw what had been driven into the top slats. Not nails, not buttons, teeth. They were human by the look of them, yellowed. Some with fillings, others cracked or still bearing fragments of gum line. Each pew held a neat arc of them, nailed like little grins waiting for judgment. I should have left then. I didn't. I told myself it was some backwoods art project, maybe part of a forgotten sect. I made camp just upslope and tried not to think about how the pews faced east, as if waiting for the sun to rise over something sacred, or something else entirely. That night, the forest began to sing. No lyrics, just long, stretched vowels, ah, ooh, ee, drawn out like echoes inside a hollow chest. Something clapped along. But it wasn't rhythm. It was offbeat, searching. When the wind picked up, the sounds stopped cold, like they were listening back. I sat in my tent holding my knife, fire gone cold, map half finished, and waited for it to pass. I told myself it was owls or wind funneled through the rocks. That lie didn't last. Because just before dawn, when I stepped out of the tent to piss, the pews were full. 7 figures, seated in silence, perfectly still. Not facing me, just aligned with the altar that no longer stood. There was no movement, no sound, not even breath visible in the chill. And then, without cue, they began to sway, back and forth, all at once, like a congregation that knew a song I'd never heard. One of them clapped, twice. Then everything went still again. I didn't eat breakfast. I packed and left without speaking aloud, as if that might call attention I didn't want. I followed the ridge trail the way I'd come, but nothing looked familiar. The trees repeated. A boulder I'd passed once was now on the wrong side. I kept looping. After an hour, I carved a small X into the bark of a pale sycamore just to be sure. 15 minutes later, I passed a sycamore with an X, but it wasn't mine. The cut was deeper, cleaner, and nailed beneath it was a molar, still red at the root. By nightfall, I hadn't found the highway. I made camp in a small ash grove and built the biggest fire I could. The night came fast and thick, like it had somewhere to be. Around midnight, the vowels came again, closer this time. And with them, the clapping, wet sounding, like hands slick with sap or blood. Then something approached the edge of the firelight. Not walking, crawling, slow, hunched, deliberate. A head swaying back and forth, too low to the ground to be anything human. I flashed my headlamp. Nothing there. But my boots had moved. I always leave them beside the tent, side by side. But now they were turned heel to heel, as if someone had stood in them, facing me while I slept. I left before sunrise and didn't stop moving. I didn't follow a path. I just aimed downhill until I heard the hum of distant traffic. When I finally flagged down a truck, I couldn't speak right away. The driver took one look at me and didn't ask. Weeks later, someone from the forestry office called to confirm a few photos I'd submitted through the mapping report. "Interesting structure," she said. "But those pews you marked, they've been there a long time. Fossilized wood, at least 100 years old." I didn't say anything. I didn't tell her the sap had still been bleeding. I didn't mention the teeth. But last winter, my doorbell rang. No one there. Just a single pine board resting on my porch. 7 old teeth nailed into a crescent smile, and the faint scent of ash and clapping smoke drifting through the dark. My name's Daniel Crow. I was 26 when my uncle disappeared on his own land, right outside of Boone, North Carolina. He was a quiet man, a widower, lived out on 40 acres of thick brush and pine slope near the state line. When he didn't show up for our usual Sunday call, I drove up to check on him. I found his truck in the drive, doors locked, keys inside, coffee on the porch still warm. But no sign of him, just the thick, suffocating silence of the trees. Uncle Ray kept trail cameras all around the property. Not for hunting, he wasn't into that, but for peace of mind. He said he'd send me clips sometimes, deer nosing along the creek bed, raccoons picking through mulch piles, even a black bear once that he called the mayor. I found the cameras easily enough. 5 in total, mounted to trees, some hidden better than others. One had fallen lens cracked, half buried in leaves. I took the memory cards back into his house, booted up his old laptop, and started watching. Most of it was uneventful. 2 days of footage, mostly still shots. But then I got to the third night, the night before he vanished. One camera, the one facing the western trail, caught him walking past just after sunset. He had his flashlight in one hand, looking off trail like he'd heard something. That wasn't odd. He checked fences often. But then, just seconds after he passed, something else moved through the frame. It walked upright at first, then dropped. It moved low, bent fully at the waist, arms hanging, no shoes, bare feet. Face inches from the ground, like it was sniffing, its head turned once. But the angle made no sense too far around, like it unhinged something in the neck. I paused it and stared. The eyes were wrong, not glowing like an animal's, just open too wide, empty, like they saw through the camera. The next clip was from a different angle, closer to the creek. My uncle again, flashlight sweeping side to side. He called out once my name, I think, except he wouldn't have known I was coming. Then he froze, like he'd heard something. The light stuttered. He turned sharply to his left, and the camera caught only the back of him. And behind that, maybe 15 feet back, The same bent figure again, crawling fast this time. It never made a sound. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at that frame. I went frame by frame, convinced it was a trick of the light. Maybe a reflection, some broken wildlife. But no animal moves like that. Nothing human should either. Then I opened the final clip. It was from the fallen camera, the one I'd found cracked at the base of an oak. The footage was crooked, tilted upward slightly, just enough to catch the trees swaying above. The timestamp matched just past midnight. Nothing moved for a while, just wind. And then a voice whispered, close. Found you. It wasn't my uncle's voice. It wasn't mine. It was higher, off pitch, like a child imitating speech. Then the camera jolted. Something had picked it up. The final seconds were blurry. Rapid motion, then darkness. I backed away from the screen. I couldn't stay in that house. I left the cameras, locked the door, drove back down the mountain. The sheriff's department ran a search the next week. Dogs, drones, volunteers. They found nothing. No tracks, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just Uncle Ray's thermos near the edge of the creek, full but unzipped, like he'd set it down carefully, expecting to come back. They asked me about the trail cam footage. I told them it was damaged, unreadable. I still don't know why I lied. Maybe because the thing in those frames wasn't something you could file a report on. Or maybe I was afraid that saying it out loud would make it follow me. That night, back at my place, I left every light on, slept with a hammer beside the bed. A week later, a new trail cam video showed up in my inbox. No sender, no message, just a 5-second clip. The angle was wrong, too low, too close to the ground. The camera tilted slightly, like someone had held it in crooked fingers. And it pointed at me, asleep, in my own bed. I didn't open the clip again. Just seeing my sleeping body from that angle too close, too still was enough. I live alone, 3rd floor, windows locked. I checked the door frame, the lock, the deadbolt. Nothing looked broken. I set up my own cameras the next day, 6 of them, inside and out. I didn't know what I was expecting, maybe to catch some stalker or some prankster playing with my grief. But part of me already knew that whatever was behind this, it wasn't someone. It was something. The nights after that were long. No sounds, no movement. But I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about how the camera must have gotten in, how it had been placed. Not dropped, not tossed, set, steady. As if something had crawled beside my bed and aimed it with care. Every sound in the hallway made my breath catch. A shadow across the blinds felt like a warning. And still, I told no one, not the sheriff, not my mother. I just watched the cameras like a man waiting for an earthquake that had already passed. On the 5th night, around 2:13 a.m., one of my indoor cams caught motion. A blur near the back hallway. I paused the feed and backed it up, frame by frame. In 4 consecutive images, something crawled past the doorway. Low again, bent wrong, long arms dragging across the tile. I couldn't see the face, but I could see the hand. 5 fingers, too many knuckles. The skin was pale and wet-looking, like boiled leather. When I flipped the brightness up, I saw something worse, bits of pine needles stuck to its back, like it had come from the woods and never stopped crawling. I grabbed my keys and left the apartment that night. Slept in my truck at the Walmart parking lot. When the sun came up, I went back, half ready to find everything torn apart. But nothing had moved. No signs of forced entry. The cameras were intact. The files were still there. The police didn't take me seriously when I finally showed them the footage. Blurry. They said, too vague, could be anything. But they logged the report, took down my statement, and told me to get a security system. I never went back to my uncle's land. Sold it to a timber company after 6 months. Never even collected the last trail cams. But I did keep the old footage. Burned onto a flash drive that I keep hidden inside a hollowed-out dictionary on my shelf. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I think about the last timestamp on the final video. Not the one with me in bed. The one before that, before my uncle disappeared. I didn't notice it at first. But he wasn't alone in those woods. The footage from camera 3 showed 2 figures him in front, lights scanning side to side, and something crouched behind, crawling just beyond the beam. But there's a third shape, barely visible in the distance. It was standing, upright, still, watching them both. The shape never moves, never turns, just stays in the shadows, thin and tall and narrow like a coat rack, with a head that tilts slightly to the side, like it's listening. I zoomed in, brightened it, sharpened it frame by frame. I almost wish I hadn't, because when I got in close enough, I realized the shape wasn't a person. It was something dressed in what looked like bark, with pieces of cloth hanging off like prayer ribbons, and its face, if you could call it that, had a mouth. Wide, open, as if caught mid-breath. And inside that mouth, even with all the pixel blur, I could swear there were teeth that looked just like mine. My name is Emery Dole. I was 39 the summer I took a contract job with the Forestry Service, tasked with clearing debris and surveying safety hazards at an abandoned lumber camp in the upper Monongahela Forest. It was supposed to be simple 2 weeks off-grid, some chainsaw work, site documentation, then back to Charleston. I'd done jobs like it before, mostly on my own, which I preferred. The solitude helped me think. But this site was different from the start. The access trail was barely more than a mud corridor, swallowed by birch and shadow. And the deeper I went, the quieter the world became. The camp itself sat low in a basin, maybe 4 or 5 decaying cabins, a tool shed, and the rusted skeleton of what might have been a log loader. Everything was collapsed or half swallowed by moss. But someone had been there more recently than the records showed. I found soup cans stacked in careful pyramids beneath the eaves, bottle caps arranged in rows along the railings, and a circle of old boots nailed heel first into a tree trunk, all pointed downward, all paired. I radioed it in, but got only static. The ranger station was supposed to be 30 miles off, close enough for contact. But the air felt thick, like a signal couldn't push through it. I stayed that first night in what was left of the foreman's cabin, set up a cot, tried not to breathe too deep. It smelled like oil and mildew and something faintly sweet. Sleep came slow, around midnight. I heard movement outside. Not footsteps, just shifting. A sound like gravel being rearranged by hand. I sat up, pulled the curtain aside. Nothing there. But the morning after, the cans I'd seen were restacked. Higher now, tighter, balanced to the point of impossibility. I told myself it had to be animals. Maybe raccoons. Maybe a hiker playing games. But the next night confirmed otherwise. I was sitting by the campfire, drawing site notes, when I looked up toward the loader's frame, Someone or something was crouched on top. Still, silent, watching me. At first I thought it was a statue, left from the old days. But then its head tilted slowly, exactly matching mine. I leaned left. It mirrored. I sat up straighter. So did it. The fire cracked and I dropped my pen. When I looked again, the figure was gone. I searched the whole site at sunrise. Nothing but deer tracks, half faded. I checked the loader frame, expecting to find scuff marks, maybe handprints. Instead, I found a line of teeth pressed into the rust, like someone had laid their face flat and bitten down. 12 marks, human-sized, deep enough to draw flecks of blood from the metal. That was the first time I thought about leaving early. But the check only cleared after completion, and a part of me still didn't want to believe I'd seen what I saw. That evening, I built a ring of rocks around my tent, lit 3 fires, and set my axe beside the cot. I didn't sleep, just listened. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I heard the machinery creak, slow pressure, like weight shifting. Then the bottle caps began to click together. Not random, a rhythm. 5 beats, pause, 3 more. The same again. I didn't recognize it as anything familiar, but it repeated. And from behind my tent, I heard something moving in tight circles, dragging something behind it. When dawn came, I stepped outside and found my boots gone. In their place was a pair I didn't recognize older, stitched leather, cracked at the seams. Inside the left one was a coin. Not American. I couldn't read the symbols, but it was warm to the touch, like it had just come out of someone's palm. I didn't put the boots on, just held them for a while, weighing the silence around me. Something about them felt deliberate, not just left behind, but given. I tucked them into my pack without really knowing why, and tried to carry on with the site check. But the camp was shifting in ways I couldn't explain. The log piles looked newer, moved. The same tin can pyramid had been rebuilt again, this time in the center of the clearing, with pine cones set around the base like offerings. The bottle caps were now nailed in a straight line across one of the cabin doors low, about ankle height, as if to mark a threshold not meant to be crossed. I started hearing voices on the 4th night, faint and distant, like they were being carried from too far down the hollow. Not words, just murmurings. Some sounded close enough to be behind me. I'd turn, find nothing. Once, I thought I saw someone move between the trees, pale, crouched. Fast, I called out, more out of instinct than courage. The movement stopped, and then, slowly, the figure moved again, circling, not approaching, just orbiting the camp like it was measuring me. I stayed by the fire that night, back to the loader, axe in hand, and tried not to blink too long. By morning, the log loader had changed. Its rusted beams were covered in moss the day before. But now the top rail had been scrubbed clean, gleaming. On the far side, someone had scratched a crude symbol into the metal, a circle with 3 vertical lines through it, like a face with no mouth. I found the same mark inside the tool shed, drawn in what looked like charcoal across the wall. The boots I'd found were now resting on top of my cot, side by side, as though waiting for me to accept the trade. The axe was on the floor, and I don't remember putting it there. That day, I broke protocol and hiked out early. I didn't radio. I didn't pack the survey gear. I just left. But the trail didn't feel the same. I followed my GPS. But the terrain folded strangely hills I hadn't climbed on the way in, turns that pulled too wide, after nearly 4 hours of walking. I found myself back at the camp. Not close. Inside it. I had crossed the clearing without even realizing. The tin can pyramid was taller now, reaching almost chest height. And on top, balanced with uncanny precision, was a tooth. Long, human, roots still wet. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't light a fire. I waited for the dark to pass. And sometime around midnight, I saw them, crouched figures, perched on the ruins of the cabins, unmoving but alert, watching. There were 6, maybe more, each mimicking a different gesture I'd made earlier, hand on chin, head tilted. One even held a stick like my axe. They weren't mocking. They were learning, studying. Their eyes reflected no light. Their skin blended into bark. One clapped once, softly. Then they all vanished. When I finally made it out, the ranger met me at the service station with a frown. "You went past the boundary," he said, pointing to the old map. "That site's not on the list anymore." I told him what I saw. He just shook his head. "Those aren't our ruins, son. Never were." I asked him what the symbol meant, the circle with the 3 lines. He looked away and muttered something I didn't catch. But as I drove off, I saw the same symbol carved into the bark of a tree near the exit. Fresh, deep, almost pulsing with color. Back home, I burned the boots. I tossed the flash drive I'd used to back up my notes. But I kept one thing, though I don't remember choosing to an old bottle cap, bent perfectly in half, with a drop of something dark and dry inside. I found it in my coat pocket weeks later, and sometimes, late at night, I hear that same slow rhythm tapping on my window. 5 beats. Pause. 3 more. I crossed the bridge around noon. Narrow thing, made of old timber and frayed rope, slung over a dry creek bed in the backcountry near Elkmont, Tennessee. I'd been hiking solo for 3 days, trying to map a section of trail that most folks in town said was impassable. They were right. The path leading there was overgrown, swallowed by bramble and fog. The kind that clings low to the ground and makes everything feel deeper than it is. I should have turned back when I saw the bridge swaying without wind. But I'd come too far, and curiosity's a hard thing to ignore. It wasn't a long crossing, maybe 40 feet, but halfway across. The trees on the far side looked different, greener, cleaner. There was a shimmer to the air, like heat distortion, even though the temperature hadn't budged all morning. I stepped off the last plank and the sound dropped. Just gone. No birds, no wind. Even my footsteps felt muffled, like I was walking on carpet. I looked back once, instinctively. The bridge was still there, gently swaying. I nodded to myself and moved forward. Maybe 10 minutes later, I paused to drink some water and checked my GPS. No signal, not even a blip. That wasn't unusual for the terrain, but when I opened my trail app, the map was blank, not frozen blank, white screen. I tried to restart it, but the battery drained from 70% to 0 in seconds. I laughed at first, probably a glitch. But then I noticed the quiet again. Still no wind, no rustle. Just the faint sound of something moving in the leaves behind me. I turned. The bridge was gone. Not broken, not out of sight. Just not there. The clearing I'd stepped into was smooth and continuous, like the path had never been split by a creek at all. I walked back to where I was sure the bridge had started. No sign of rope, no wood, just solid ground. I ran my hand along the tree I'd marked earlier, no notch, no bark peel, like it had never been touched. My mouth went dry. I tried to retrace my steps, but the trail curved wrong. It bent too sharp to the left, then spiraled in a way that made me dizzy. After 10 minutes, I found myself standing in the same spot. I knew because of a fallen log covered in shelf mushrooms I'd noted before. It hadn't moved, but the shadow it cast now pointed east. The sun hadn't shifted. The forest had. I kept moving. I didn't run, but I walked with purpose, counting each step. At step 360, I saw the bridge again, but not the one I'd crossed. This one was longer, thinner. The ropes were frayed worse, and the wood was darker, like it had soaked in blood or rain. And standing on the far side, just beyond the start of the planks, was a figure, still watching. I called out. No answer. I lifted my arm to wave, and the figure mirrored it perfectly, too perfectly, like a reflection with no delay. I took a step forward. It did too. I stepped back. It followed. I couldn't see a face, just the dark shape of a person the same height, same build. I turned and walked the opposite direction. This time, I didn't look back. I didn't stop moving after that, kept my head low. Eyes forward, like prey pretending it hadn't seen the predator. But the trail didn't lead out. It twisted, folded, doubled back in ways that made no sense. I started seeing the same crooked branch every few minutes, the same burst of white fungus on the same cracked stump. I marked a tree with my knife and passed it again less than 10 minutes later. Except the mark was deeper, and there was something tucked inside it, a red thread, coiled like a vein. I lost track of time. My watch had stopped. The light in the canopy didn't shift, even though the sweat on my back told me hours had passed. My water ran out. I tried to ration it, but panic makes you thirsty. I began to feel like the trees were leaning, bending slightly inward, as if urging me to keep going. I started talking to myself, not full words, just little mantras to keep my focus. Left at the log, right at the rock. It didn't matter. Every turn brought me back to the clearing where the second bridge stood, and each time I returned, the figure on the other side was closer, still unmoving, still watching. But each time, it stood a few feet farther across the bridge, one hand resting on the rope like it had been waiting too long. I tried shouting again, but my voice came out thin and distant, like it belonged to someone else. I picked up a stone and threw it toward the figure. It didn't flinch. The rock didn't land, just vanished midair. I turned and vomited from the sudden vertigo. On the 5th loop, maybe 6th, I noticed something new. A small wooden charm hanging from a tree limb near the bridge. It was a circle, carved with the same 3-line symbol I'd seen once before in an old ranger's manual, a mark used to indicate places where maps lose meaning. I reached up to touch it, but the rope snapped and the charm dropped into the grass. I didn't pick it up. That night, I made camp beside the clearing, but I didn't sleep. The fire I built wouldn't hold. Every time I blinked, I thought I saw someone on the trail's edge half behind a tree, crouched, then gone. The air smelled different, damp, metallic, like wet stones and bone. Around midnight, I heard footsteps, not on the dirt on the bridge planks, steady, measured, one by one. Then the rope groaned. I couldn't move. Not frozen with fear, just watched. Like any motion would break some invisible seal. The footsteps stopped. And then I heard my own voice, low and exact. From the darkness, come back across. I said nothing. My heart thudded against my ribs so loud it hurt. The voice came again, just above a whisper. Same cadence, same breath. It's safe now. Come back. When I looked toward the bridge again, it was empty. At sunrise, I tried one last time to break the loop. I walked east for what had to be miles, ignoring the trail completely, crashing through bramble, climbing over rock. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw a glimpse of asphalt through the trees. A road. Real. Sunlight on glass. I ran. Weeks passed. I told no one the full story, just that I got turned around. I left out the bridge, the figure, the voice that sounded like mine. But a month ago, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Just a wooden charm inside same 3-line symbol, still warm to the touch. And last night, I drove past a back road near Elkmont, just for a second, in the rear view. I swear I saw it the same bridge, faint and rotting, vanishing into the trees. Someone stood on the far side, and this time they waved. I took the dogs out to escape. Not from anything dramatic, just the noise, the emails, the pulse of a world that never quiets. Their names are Della and Red. A shepherd mix and a mutt with one eye and more attitude than sense. We camped on an unmarked ridge in western North Carolina, just east of Silo Knob. I'd found the place years ago while bushwhacking a game trail and marked it on an old paper topo. No signal, no foot traffic. Just us and the trees and the wind. It was supposed to be a reset. The first 2 nights were perfect. Clear skies, soft air, and the kind of silence you forget you miss until it wraps around you. The dogs ranged close during the day, nosed along the edge of the bluff, and curled up tight by the fire at night. On the 3rd morning, I stepped out of the tent and stopped cold. Both food bowls were full. Not with kibble, I'd packed a sealed bag, and it was still inside the tent, but with raw meat. Red, picky as he is, was licking the bowl clean. Della sat beside hers like she was waiting for permission. I checked the perimeter. No tracks, no signs of a break-in, just those 2 bowls, glistening with something red. Wet, and not entirely fresh. I touched the meat. Still warm. I gathered it all into a trash bag and buried it 20 yards from camp. Then I double-checked the tent flap and counted every zipper. Nothing missing, nothing torn. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been watched, maybe not that night, but close. That afternoon, I didn't let the dogs out of sight. Every time they sniffed at the tree line, I called them back. They came easy, but their ears stayed pricked that night as I sat by the fire writing in my journal. I noticed Red wasn't asleep, just lying still, staring into the dark like he was waiting for something to move. Della sat up once and let out a low growl. Not at a sound, at the absence of one. It was dead quiet. No wind, no crickets, not even the low drone of high-altitude planes. Just the soft pop of firewood and the long space between breaths. I didn't sleep much. I kept the flashlight in my hand and listened for the leaves to shift. Once, around 3 a.m., I heard something sit. Not walk, not creep. Just the sound of weight settling onto the ground, maybe 10 feet from the tent wall. I didn't unzip it. I didn't call out. I just waited. Della pressed against my leg. Red was already there, breathing low, ears flat. We stayed like that until the first pale light broke through the nylon. The bowls were full again. Same raw meat. Same clean placement. Not spilled or disturbed. But this time, a third bowl had been added. Smaller, porcelain, decorated with tiny blue flowers around the edge. Inside it, a single, raw rabbit's foot. I didn't touch the third bowl, just stared at it, heart sinking in a way I couldn't name. It was too careful, too intimate, like someone had been watching long enough to know the dog's feeding habits and mine. I poured the contents back into the hole I dug the day before, buried it deeper, then packed up camp in 30 minutes flat. I didn't want to leave in a panic. Didn't want to spook the dogs or myself more than necessary. But there was no question in my mind we weren't alone. Someone had come close enough to kneel beside my animals while I slept. And not once had I heard them. I headed north, aiming for a Forest Service road I remembered from a past trip. It should have been an easy half-day hike. But the terrain twisted. The trails I knew veered wrong, grown over or shifted, as if the land didn't want to be remembered. I passed the same outcropping of shale 3 times. The sun stayed high too long. By late afternoon, I realized I hadn't heard a bird call all day. Not one. And Della, usually the bold one, refused to lead. She stayed at my side, low to the ground, tail down. Red ranged ahead, but never far. And every time I stopped to rest, he'd sit facing outward, toward the trees, alert, just before dusk. I found a small clearing and decided it was safer to stop than risk night movement. I didn't build a fire. Instead, I set the tent up with no light and fed the dogs the last of the kibble. They didn't touch it. Both sat, ears perked, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. When I finally laid down, exhausted, I placed the leash clips around my wrists. I wasn't going to let them wander, no matter what. Sleep came shallow and thin. I must have drifted for an hour when I woke to the sound of chewing. Not the dogs. I turned slowly and saw them both pressed tight against the far wall of the tent, silent. Still. The chewing came from just outside, wet and slow, something eating with deliberate rhythm. Mouth open, I held my breath. It went on for a minute, maybe more, then stopped. A soft laugh followed a child's giggle, high and whispering, as if someone was trying to remember what laughter sounded like. I didn't move until morning, when I stepped out. There was no sign of food or bowls, but the ground was marked prints, too small to be adult, too large to be anything wild. Bare feet, no tread, no toe detail, just the weight of them. Circling the tent in wide loops, I followed the tracks a few yards before they vanished into pine needles. Red refused to go near them. Della just stared at the place where they ended, whining low in her throat. We made it out that afternoon, after the trees finally broke and I found the gravel road like a lifeline laid across the ridge. I didn't stop until we reached the ranger station. The attendant offered water and asked if I was okay. I didn't answer, just shook my head and waited for the dogs to drink. I reported nothing. What would I say that something fed my dogs better than I ever had? And waited beside our tent just to listen to them sleep. 2 weeks later, a package arrived at my house. No return address, just a box wrapped in waxed brown paper and tied with red string. Inside was the porcelain bowl, washed, dried, and beneath it, tucked in a nest of moss. A new rabbit's foot. This one was warm. My name's Garrett, and I work soil mapping for an environmental research firm out of Asheville. It's mostly dull work testing pH levels, checking for erosion, logging GPS coordinates into a field tablet. This particular job was part of a long-term vegetation study near the southern edge of the Pisgah National Forest. I was assigned a straight grid line to flag half-mile increments marked with bright orange tape, always along the forest's edge. I'd done dozens like it before, but this line didn't behave like any of the others. No matter how far I walked, I never reached the end. The tree line just kept going. At first, I figured I was miscalculating, maybe offset by terrain or slope. But after 3 hours of marking, I realized I'd passed the same downed log at least twice. Same axe-shaped rot in the middle. Same patch of lichen shaped like a bird in flight. I started carving small notches into the bark as I went simple identifiers, just to be sure I wasn't looping. But 20 minutes later, I passed one of my own notches again, and beneath it, freshly nailed into the trunk, was a human ear, dry, brown, with a silver stud still in the lobe. I froze, listened. No wind, no animals. The forest had gone hollow, like someone had taken the sound and wrung it out. I backed away, retraced my steps, and found the previous flag marker I'd set. It was gone. In its place, a strip of red cloth tied low to a branch, just below eye level. I hadn't brought red tape, just orange. I turned off my tablet and left it there. Didn't care about the data anymore. I just wanted to get out. But that's when the trees began to change. They weren't just tall, they were aligned, perfectly spaced. A grid not made by nature. It felt wrong in a way that was hard to name, like walking through rows of soldiers holding their breath. I turned due west, thinking I could angle back to the access road. But the trail twisted, bent back. Each path I chose circled into itself. The sun didn't shift. I checked my compass and watched the needle tremble before settling, pointing not north, but at me. I panicked. I broke into a run, following the slope down, thinking gravity would lead me to a stream, or any landmark. After maybe a mile, I stumbled into a small glade I didn't remember. Empty except for one thing, a fresh flag, bright orange, tied to a stake in the ground. My own handwriting was on it, my initials, the date. But I'd never flagged this place. I was sure of it. The soil was undisturbed. No sign of foot traffic, no broken brush. I camped there, unwilling to move in the dark. I didn't light a fire, didn't want anything seeing me. The night dragged on, thick and airless. Just before sleep finally came, I heard something high up in the canopy, a shifting, then a sound like fabric tearing. I looked up. There was someone in the trees, crouched in the branches, pale limbs folded wrong, head hanging too low, watching me without blinking. I didn't sleep after that, just lay there in the dark, every muscle tense, watching the spot where I'd seen the thing in the canopy. It hadn't moved, not in the usual sense, but the longer I stared, the more I realized it wasn't still. Its limbs flexed in tiny twitches, like it was adjusting for balance, or maybe anticipation. I turned my head once, just for a moment, to check the pack by my feet. When I looked back up, it was gone. No noise, no motion, just vanished into the leaves like it had folded itself into the branches. At sunrise, I packed and moved fast, I ignored the compass, ignored the map. Just trusted the feel of the land and the urge to run downhill. For a while, I thought I was making progress. The air grew thinner, the light sharper. Then I came to the edge again, the same flagged point I'd slept at the night before. My flag, my handwriting, same initials, same date. But now, there was something new beside the stake my tablet, which I'd left behind hours earlier, now resting upright and dry. And beneath it, scratched into the soil with a stick or a claw, was the word stay. I didn't touch the tablet. I backed away slow, like you would from an animal that hadn't decided yet whether to pounce. The trees behind me shifted not visibly, but in presence, like they leaned just a little closer. I took a longer route around the glade, found a trail that looked older, less tampered with. I followed it for what felt like hours. I even started to smell water mud, algae, the promise of something living. But when the path opened again, I found myself at the same glade for the third time. This time, the tablet was gone, the flag too, and nailed into the tree nearest the center was a strip of cloth from my backpack. That's when I knew I wasn't going to walk out the usual way. I chose a direction at random and forced myself to stop thinking. Just walked. Didn't rest. Didn't mark. Didn't measure. I stopped only when the light grew dim and my legs couldn't hold me. I was preparing to pitch the tent again when I found a new sign, 3 trees in a perfect triangle, each with a symbol carved into the bark. Not letters, shapes. One looked like an eye, one a spiral, and the last, a human tooth embedded into the trunk itself. Wet at the root. I left everything but the essentials and ran. Hours later, maybe days. I couldn't tell I burst into a gravel road just as headlights swept around the bend. A forestry truck. The driver slammed the brakes and jumped out. Asked if I was hurt. I couldn't answer him. I looked back once into the trees and saw only shadow. No sign of flags or symbols or watchers in the branches. Back at the station, I asked about the site. The ranger frowned. We don't have an active study near Pisgah's Edge. He said, that line's been decommissioned for years. I told him about the flags, the ear, the tooth. He said nothing, just handed me a cup of water and made a quiet call in the next room. That was 6 months ago. I haven't gone back. I don't hike anymore. I don't even drive east of Asheville. But sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I hear the flag tape flapping in still air. No wind, just movement, calling me back to a tree line that never ends. I reached the fire tower later than I should have. It sat at the edge of an old growth pocket in West Virginia, out past Cranberry Glades, where the trail narrows into near nothing and even the insects go quiet. The tower wasn't on any map I'd found, but locals whispered about it over diner coffee like it was a memory no one wanted to admit was real. I went looking not for thrill, but for clarity. After a hard year and a harder goodbye, the solitude felt like something I needed. I figured I'd climb the tower, sleep beneath the stars, and come back changed. I didn't know how right I'd be. The trail up was blocked about halfway down trees, snapped like bones, all pointing the same direction. I should have turned back, but the ridge above beckoned, framed in dying sunlight like a promise. The tower came into view just before nightfall, 50 feet of rusted steel, still standing, still intact, the stairs wrapped tight to the frame like a spiral waiting to be unwound. I hesitated before climbing. Something about it felt off. Not dangerous, just watched. But I pushed that down and began the ascent. Halfway up, I glanced down and froze. There were 3 figures below, standing around a dead fire pit, not moving, just watching the base of the tower. Heads tilted slightly up. I couldn't make out faces, just silhouettes against the fading sky. I whispered something I don't remember and kept climbing, careful to make no sound. The platform at the top creaked underfoot but held steady. I unrolled my mat, laid out my gear, and finally turned toward the horizon, hoping to shake the image from my head. That's when I found the binoculars, old, military style, mounted to the rail with a rusted clamp. I leaned in, pointed them down toward the clearing. The fire pit was empty, but in the tree line beyond it, the figures now stood in a row, 3 of them, still and straight, spaced like fence posts. I didn't blink, just moved the lens left to right. The last figure on the right wore my face. Same jacket, same posture. Even the tilt of my head matched the one I'd made when I first spotted them. The binoculars began to tremble beneath my hands. I stepped back and knocked them sideways. The sound echoed through the valley. Below, all 3 figures turned. I dropped to the platform floor, heart thudding, breath sharp in my chest. For a long minute, I didn't move, just listened. The wind had picked up again low, dry, carrying the kind of silence that has weight. When I finally dared peek over the railing, the clearing below was empty. No figures, no fire pit, just the tower's shadow stretched long across the trees. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined it, that the dusk and stress had warped something in my mind. But I didn't believe it. You know when you're being mimicked. You feel it deep, behind the bones. I stayed on the platform through the night, too afraid to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my own face staring back at me. Sometime after midnight, I began hearing something scrape along the steel support slide. Careful, as if hands were testing the frame. Then came the hum. Not singing, not speech, just a low, vibrating tone, rising and falling like breath forced through a hollow throat. It circled the tower base, slow and steady, then stopped. I held my breath. The stillness that followed felt surgical, like the world itself was holding its lungs. At dawn, I made my way down, step by step, gripping the railing like a lifeline. I didn't look down until the final landing. That's when I saw the footprints, 3 sets, bare, circling the tower's base in overlapping spirals. But none walked away. They ended at the lowest step, just stopped, toes pointed inward, as if whoever left them had stepped directly into the tower's shadow and disappeared. I walked back fast, barely stopping to drink, but the forest had changed. I knew every bend in the trail on the way in, but now each turn looked too clean, too symmetrical. The moss grew in matching patches. The trees leaned in perfect arcs. I passed the same birch tree 3 times, each time with a different object tucked in the crook of its roots, a pair of shoelaces, a silver ring. And then on the 3rd pass, a Polaroid of me on the tower platform, from behind. I didn't stop moving after that. Didn't check for phone signal. Didn't mark the trail. I just followed the path until the light shifted and I burst through the brush into a ranger's clearing. They asked if I was lost. I said nothing. One of them pointed at my coat and asked where I got it. Said they'd found something like it up near the old tower. Years ago, during a missing persons sweep. I didn't answer. Couldn't. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. No one had taken a photo of me up there. But that night, back home, I found a note slipped under my door. No name, just a single sentence in block print. Don't look through the lens if it looks back. I've burned my hiking gear, moved apartments, changed my number. But every now and then, in the reflection of a window or a turned-off screen, I catch a glimpse of something behind me, not quite moving, just waiting. And I swear, it still has my face. I was 19 when my sister vanished. Her name was Claire, older by 3 years, sharper in wit and bone, the kind of person who left a mark in every room, but never let anyone see how much she bled to do it. She disappeared on a hiking trip near Dismal Creek in Virginia, alone, supposedly for clarity after a breakup. We searched for weeks, dogs, flyers, helicopters, you name it. No sign of struggle, no gear recovered. Just her car left parked at the trailhead. Windows fogged from the inside. The police said she probably got lost, succumbed to the elements. But I never believed that. Not even once. 10 years later, I went back. I didn't tell anyone, just packed light, left a note for work, and drove out early one October morning. I didn't expect to find her. I just needed to walk the ground she vanished into. Needed to understand what it felt like to vanish with her. The trail was quiet. Too quiet. Every footstep sounded like it didn't belong to me. I kept looking for things that weren't there. Her voice, her boots. Some echo of the person I'd never gotten to say goodbye to. About 5 miles in, the trail split. The main path bent left toward the ridge, but a narrow break in the brush tugged at me raw earth. Not trampled, but used, worn down in that subtle, eerie way paths become when someone walks them every night alone. I followed it without thinking. After maybe an hour, I began to notice how the trees leaned. They curved inward, toward the hollow at the center of the slope. The light grew dimmer, not from clouds, but from something thicker, heavier in the air. It felt like breathing through flannel. I remember thinking that this place hadn't seen daylight in years. That's when I saw her. Claire. She stepped out from behind a pine trunk like she'd never left barefoot. Eyes wide, arms hanging low like they weren't hers. Her hair was longer than I remembered, streaked with dirt and something brittle. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. I said her name. I said it again and again. She blinked once, slow, and then turned. I followed. I don't know how long I trailed her. Time broke, bent. My watch stopped ticking. The air grew thick with the smell of rot and something faintly metallic. She never looked back, never changed pace, just walked, always just far enough ahead that I had to trust she was still there. Then we came to a clearing, and in that clearing were others like her, barefoot, wide-eyed, still, watching. They stood like trees, in human shape, dozens of them. Silent, unmoving, their skin pale and stretched, clothes worn thin like bark. Some looked like hikers, some looked like children. All of them had that same hollow stare, wide and unblinking, as if their eyes were stuck open in awe or terror. Claire moved to the center of the clearing and turned to face me. Slowly, deliberately. She opened her mouth. There was no tongue, just a smooth pink pit where speech used to live. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Something in the back of my mind told me to run, to flee back up the trail, to let her go all over again. But I stepped forward instead. One pace, then another. The figures didn't react. Claire didn't move. But my ears filled with a pressure so intense, I thought my head would split. Like I'd crossed into a place I had no name for, where laws stopped working and time didn't know how to tick. When I reached her, she touched my hand. Her skin was cold, but not dead. More like stone left in the shade too long. She didn't squeeze, didn't guide, just let it rest there. Fingers barely curled around mine. I whispered her name. No reaction. I asked if she knew me. Her gaze flicked to the side, not at me, but at something behind me. I turned. There was a figure in the trees, not still like the others, breathing, watching. It wore her backpack faded canvas, torn strap, the one they'd never recovered. It smiled when it saw me see it, then stepped backward into the dark. That was the moment I knew she wasn't gone. Not completely. Something had taken her, reshaped her, kept her here not out of mercy but purpose, like she was part of a larger thing now. One node in a web that stretched through this hollow, each figure a limb or eye. I told her I'd come back for her. I don't know if she heard. I left without looking behind me, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I didn't want to know if any of them had followed. I emerged from the trees at dusk, cut up, shoes ruined, compass spinning. My car was there, untouched. I drove straight through the night and didn't stop until I hit daylight on the other side of Roanoke. For days after, I heard whispers in sleep, soft and vowel-heavy, like someone trying to form words they'd long forgotten. Sometimes I dream of the clearing of standing motionless, barefoot, tongue absent, watching someone who looks like me approach. And in the dream, I never moved to stop them. I'd been hiking solo for 4 days, deep into the Unaka Mountains. When I made camp on a soft rise just off an old ridge trail, no cell signal, no traffic, just the comfort of being completely unobserved until I wasn't. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I cooked, wrote in my journal, let the quiet peel layers off my mind. It wasn't until the 3rd morning that I noticed something strange. A thin red string had been tied between trees all around my tent, forming a perfect square perimeter. Neat knots, no slack. There were no breaks in the line, no way in or out that didn't mean stepping over or cutting through. I didn't sleepwalk. I'm not prone to sleep paralysis, and I sure as hell hadn't packed red string. I examined it carefully. The fibers were old, slightly frayed, like something used before and tied again. I followed the line around the tent twice, hoping to find a clue: footprints, drag marks. Anything but the ground was clean, soft with moss and undisturbed pine needles. Even the string itself was silent in the wind, like it didn't belong to the world around it. The air felt heavier inside that square, like the trees were watching through lashes of bark. That day, I didn't stray far, collected water, kept the fire low, didn't take my boots off even once. I left the string untouched, too uncertain to break whatever game or trap had been set. That night, it returned. Not the string, it was still there, unmoved but the sound. Movement outside the square. Light, fast, skimming steps. Something small, circling, a laugh high, quick, breathless, like a child's first attempt at pretending fear. The kind that dances just out of sight and wants you to follow. I didn't move. I lay in my sleeping bag with the zipper clenched in one fist and my camp knife in the other. The footsteps sped up, then stopped, then started again, closer. Always just outside the string. Never crossing, never pausing. The laughter came again, softer now, more like humming, or breath caught in the throat. And once, I swear, it whispered my name. By morning, the string was gone. Not cut, not broken, just vanished. The trees it had been tied to stood bare, bark unmarked, no sign of pressure or indentation. But in the spot where my boots had been set neatly outside the tent flap, as always, I found something else. 2 small prints in the soil. Not human, not animal. Just odd wide at the ball, tapering unnaturally at the heel, as if whoever left them had danced their way into stillness. The prints faced the tent. Close. Too close. I didn't wait for breakfast. Packed in silence. Every knot tied with shaking fingers, every zipper double-checked. I hiked fast, lungs raw from the climb, barely looking up from the trail. It wasn't until midday that I realized I hadn't checked the map once. The trail just kept going. No markers, no forks. Every ridge looked the same. And when I finally stopped, there it was, again tied across 2 low branches, just ahead red string. A single loop this time, no square, just a circle, swaying gently in wind that didn't touch the leaves. I cut through it with my knife and kept moving. But that night, as I tried to rest under a ledge of slate, I woke to a new sound. Not footsteps, not laughter. This time, it was play. Something mimicking the scrape of tent zippers. A low, curious sound, repeated like a question. And then the faintest tug at the tarp over my head. A gentle testing, like someone drawing a finger around the edge of a mirror. I didn't breathe, just waited. The sound went on for minutes, then stopped, when I finally turned on my light. Nothing was there, but the knife I'd used earlier had been moved. Not stolen, just flipped. Edge turned in, as if whoever had touched it wanted to remind me which way pain faced. I made it out the next day, though I'm still not sure how. No trail signs, no familiar slope, just a strange silence lifting all at once. And the sudden appearance of a gravel road I hadn't seen in years. I didn't look back, didn't log the route, didn't tell anyone where I'd been. But a week later, back in my apartment, I found something that hadn't been there before. A single strand of red string, tied in a perfect circle, hanging from the inside knob of my bedroom door.